Thank you for joining me for another All Hands on Tech live with your host, David Neal, Principal Developer Advocate at Pluralsight. I also go by Reverent Geek on Twitter and Instagram and other social media, including GitHub. Not really a social media platform, but that is also my username handle at on GitHub and other platforms. So, if you want to get in contact with me, um, chances are if you search for Reverend Geek on anything, that's where I'll be. Um, I've also got a website, reverendgeek.com, that you can contact me through. Thanks again for joining. I'd love to hear your feedback if you're returning from one of the previous sessions, and if you've been getting any value out of coming to these live sessions, learning about Electron, Node.js, JavaScript, tips and tricks that I'm hopefully am sharing that are valuable to you along the way. Um, in case this is your first time joining, what we're doing is we're building a desktop application using Electron, and it's Electron is a fantastic stack of technology built with Node.js and Chrome that allows you to build native looking desktop applications that work across every platform, Linux, Mac OS, Windows. And if you've used apps like Slack or Visual Studio Code, which is the editor that I use every day, those are built with Electron, and a bunch of other applications that are out there are built with Electron. And I think it's pretty cool technology to work with, especially coming from a web development world where I'm much more comfortable using HTML and CSS and JavaScript than I am trying to learn the native UI interfaces in the different platforms. It's pretty hard to build a cross-platform desktop app that's native to every platform. It is not a trivial task. Um, Thank you for joining, Nicole. I really appreciate your encouragement, and thank you for joining, Yuri. Um, glad that you're here too. Um, One thing that I want to start off right off the bat, in case whether regardless if you've been to any of the previous sessions, I made a few additions since last Thursday, and that is I have taken everything that we've built so far. I should have done this a long time ago, but I've put it on GitHub under my GitHub repository. So if you go to github.com/reverentgeek/electron-teleprompter, you can get the latest source code up to what we worked on together last week. And I will continue to update this repository as we go forward. Also, there is the GitHub issues and a GitHub project associated with this source code that you can use to submit your own feature ideas and request, things that we could work on together. If you've got a cool idea for how you think we could improve the application, of course, drop it in the comments, but also you can go to the repository and create a GitHub issue, feature request, or if you run into a problem, of course, you can put that out there too. And that way, we'll make sure that we review those features and things going forward so that as we continue to develop this application, we're focusing on the things that are most valuable to you. There, when I first created a proof of concept around this idea, I built it specifically for something that I needed, but what I need may not be what everyone else needs. Not that we can make everyone happy. I mean, this is a teleprompter application after all. Probably not going to use it to you know keep track of your stamp collection or whatever kind of hobby that you're into. So to give you a an idea, I have this setup where I have a computer here and a secondary monitor here. And the secondary monitor is what I typically use for coding and writing and so forth. And I have up here a camera that I'm can point to, and a teleprompter. So I've got an iPad connected to my desktop, my laptop, and it mirrors the screen that I have on my laptop. So that as I'm working, if I'm on a call or if I'm giving a presentation, I can continue to look directly into the camera and still be able to see what's, you know, on my desktop or in the window that's around. And I created this teleprompter app as a way to be able to overlay um, transparently some text on the screen so that if I'm conducting, say, an interview or a podcast, or I'm doing recording a tutorial, or I'm giving a presentation at work, and I want to make sure that I have my notes and um, different prompts and different things that I want to have with me, I can have those up on the screen and I can be looking directly at the text that I need while still looking right into the camera. This is a wonderful setup, and I am I have gotten a lot of value out of um, this this setup over the last few years, and I'd love to be able to share that with you, and hope that you get um, you know have some fun with the source code and the technology, and maybe one day we'll publish it as a real application so that other people can take advantage of it. Thanks, Nicole, for following me, for getting connected to the source code. Let's see, what else can we talk about before we dive into the code? Um, there's whatever platform you're on, um, streaming to LinkedIn and Twitch and YouTube and Facebook. The best, you know, the best way you can help me is by leaving me some comments in your chat so that I can see, what your any questions that you have, any ideas you have along the way. That that really helps me to do what I do even better, because it's a great encouragement to me to see folks engaged. So please do uh, grab some grab the source code if you can, and follow along, or have some fun with it. And if you run into any issues, let me know. So in the source code, let's switch to the right uh, window. I've got the GitHub repository up here, and the things you need to know. We went over this a couple of times in the very beginning, but in order to be able to build this application and to be able to, tweak it on your own if you want to, you will need some version of Node.js. I highly recommend getting the LTS version, which is the current long-term support version of Node. That is, as of right now, that's version 16. You want to clone or download the source code from the repository and then use npm install to install the dependencies that are part of the project. And from there, you can edit the script. Right now, the script is in content.markdown under the source/client folder. And you can launch the desktop app using npm start. Where we dropped off last time was we were about to begin adding a feature to the application that saves and restores the state of the application. When we first created the app, um, every time we launched it, it would be the same size and centered on the screen. Well, we want to allow the app to be resized and moved to wherever you prefer to have the application displayed on the screen, and to have the application remember that so that when you close the app and relaunch it, it comes back in the same exact spot, same place, same size. So we're about to create a um, new module that will allow us to do that. I just noticed looking at these, my screen versus the screen up here, and I'll add add myself to the window here so you can see me. So when I look at what's being reflected up here, that the text default config, that's pretty hard to read. Um, so I apologize if some of the code that I've been displaying has been somewhat difficult to read. I don't think there's enough contrast there. So give me a second. I'm gonna see if I can find a better um, theme. So I can do this. This is a tip that I shared before, but Command Shift P brings up the command palette, or on Windows, I think it's Control Shift P. But learn your keyboard shortcuts, because the more you can keep your hands on your keyboard, the more keyboard shortcuts you can learn. Um, it's just more efficient than breaking stride and moving your hand over to your mouse or your trackpad, or whatever device you may be using, especially if you're sitting at a desktop. Now if you're on a laptop, maybe it's not so big a deal, but man, those keyboard shortcuts can certainly save you a lot of time. So Control Shift P brings up the command palette, and you can just pretty much search for anything inside the palette. So we got color theme. Right now I'm using GitHub Light. I've got several GitHub themes. Let me see what this GitHub Plus looks like. Yeah, that's better, but it's still a little bit faint. I know some people really like dark themes. I've gone back and forth. I sometimes use dark themes. Um, we'll just go with the standard Visual Studio light theme for now. But my personal opinion on light versus dark themes, it may be great when you're working on your own code. It's kind of easier on the eyes. I totally get that. But I have found that in a presentation, like if I'm giving a demo in front of an audience, or showing some code on a slide, or any kind of teaching scenario, dark themes are usually kind of harder to read. There's not as much contrast as uh, especially you don't know like what kind of projector you may be using, or what kind of screen someone else may have. Maybe the contrast is not as good. So I think consistently bl- black text on white is easier to read than, say, a light colored text on a dark background. That's just my personal opinion. Uh, uh, Love to hear your feedback if you think um, a darker theme would be you know worth trying for the stream. Okay, so we got just the beginning of this module. So a module in Node.js and Electron uses CommonJS or ES can also use the more modern um, ECMAScript or ES modules. ES modules being like it uses the import exports keyword rather than require statements. Um, the the magic or whatever in Node.js, whether you're building a Node.js application or an Electron application, is that module. There's this special thing that's available called module, and module.exports is how you register a object or a method or function so that it is exposed to the rest of the application. So when you go to uh, import or require this module somewhere else, anything that's been exposed through module.exports is what's going to show up. If you don't use module.exports, um, then whatever code you've put in this file will be private or hidden to the other part of the application. So this is how Node and those kinds of technologies create kind of like public private interfaces. Um, so we've got a module.exports uh, defined as a function that takes in an argument called default config, which will probably be an object that has things like the initial, the default height and width of a window or any other kind of default settings for the application. And we'll go and retrieve the data for the, the, the last saved configuration and return that. So let's just say as a dummy starting point, um, almost like if we were kind of writing enough code to make a test pass, right? We're going to return from this function an object that includes a height, let's say 800, a width of 600, a X position of 0, and a Y position of 0. We're not doing anything with the default config yet. So we've got this module, state.js. And in our main, we have this function here called create window. This is where the magic happens during the launch of the application. As I've explained in previous episodes, the way Electron works is it's a hybrid Node.js and Chrome application. So it begins its application lifecycle as a Node.js process or executable, and from there you have this main uh, file or main app entry point into the application, and from there you can create one or more windows to display, and they're called browser windows. in Electron terminology. And you can, these windows can have lots and lots of different properties and settings. So right now you've got width and height. Center is true, so it's centered on the screen, and we're using the transparency true and frame false to give the window this transparent effect. We're also using transparency in CSS to do the same thing with like text, so that the text still, is displayed on top, but you can kind of read through it. Before we go any further, as I've been, as I usually do when we first get started, is let's just make sure that the app still works the way we expect it to. So I'm going to switch over to the command line and run npm start. And here's the app. Let me hide these other things so you can see it better. But this is the app in a nutshell. We able to have a script with different headings. You can click and drag the window around, but this is going to overlay on top of whatever other apps that you may have running. So you may put this on top of a Zoom or a Google Meet or whatever conference software you use to have your script right on top of the the person that you're talking to. Okay, Command Q to quit. So we want to, when the when the window or when the application starts, we want to restore the last known state of the application. And we can check where I was going uh, in the previous and last week's stream, is that there's some things built into Electron that make it really more convenient to build a desktop application. And there are some paths that are platform agnostic that we can, there are lots and lots of platform agnostic APIs in Electron that we can take advantage of that will, we use as a developer a single API, and then Electron knows how to translate those commands on whatever operating system you're you're running on. So, um, you know, Windows does things different than Mac, and Mac does things different than, Linux, as far as like windows and menus and pop-ups and um, system dialogues, and we can take advantage of all those operating system features from Electron. But we have the convenience of being able to use those things in Electron in a platform agnostic way. So, as part of the application, um, trying to remember off the top of my head, there are paths. So let me search for like home. Here we go. So documentation is great. App.getPath, and you pass the name of the function, the name of what you're looking for. If you're looking for the user's home directory or the current app data directory, um, user data, that's what we're interested in. We want to be able to store and retrieve and store the current configuration in user data. So let me just make a note before I forget. Just going to take this and paste it into our state. This is what we need to get, and it'll be user data. That's the path we need. Okay, so where I was going earlier. Sorry, I'm a little scattered. Too many shiny objects. We've got this basic object that we're returning with height and width, X and Y. We need to use this module inside of main. So I'm going to painfully type, let's just call it state equals require, and give it a relative path. So we put it in utils state. And if you're using CommonJS, you don't have to specify the .js file extension. You can just leave it as /state, and Node.js knows that if you don't have an extension, it's going to try to see if there is a file named state.js. So just keeps things a little cleaner. So here's our state object. Oh, but it's a function. So what we're requiring is a function. So let's capitalize it, because that's kind of the convention um, in the Node.js world, that if the module that you're requiring in is a function or is a class, then you'll capitalize it. If it's like a library that has a bunch of properties and other things and doesn't require a new instance, then it'd be lowercase. Um, I don't know. It's up for debate. I'm gonna lowercase it now that I think about it, and just call it state manager. And inside create window, let's just imagine that, hey, our default config is width 800, height 600. We'll use config equals state manager and pass in the default config. Oh, there's a question. Is this what's meant by solid state? Um, so solid state, I think, refers to um, a something in electrical engineering. Electrical work is, you have a solid state uh, transformer versus tubes or something like that. I have no idea. That's way out of my league. I don't think that there's a correlation of state like that and solid. There is this set of solid principles in software development that has to do with, like, um, you know some good ideas around practice of software development. Um, and it's an acronym that includes, you know, each letter of solid is a different principle that some people agree with, some people don't agree with. Um, Such as kind of like don't repeat yourself, like having a specific piece of code in one place and not copied in lots of places. Well, I think, there's some cases where you do want code copied. But on a whole, on in general, you want to, reuse as much code as possible and have only one place to change it. So that's some of those ideas are part of solid principles. Uh, yeah. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't know that solid state, as I understand it, would be applicable to what we're doing. And we'll, instead of having these values hard coded here when we create the browser window, we'll use config dot width, config dot height. We'll set the X position to config dot X, and Y will be set to config dot Y. So our module right now that doesn't really do anything, it the it is returning 0 for X and Y. Now I don't know if that means the window will get created in like the top left corner of the screen. It may just be ignored um, by main.js. We'll just have to run it and see. But uh, just so that we know what we've done so far is working, let's use console.log to log um, the config. And let's see when we run it what happens. So here's something interesting. It did log to the window or to the console that it's using 800 by 600 0. Okay. Right now, you can't see the teleprompter script because it loaded the script at 00, the window, which apparently is on my primary screen, which is on my um, laptop, and not. So if you're looking here, I don't know if you can tell, but the teleprompter script ran over here. It launched the application and put it there instead of on this screen. So interesting plot twist there. So apparently 00, or the positioning coordinate system, takes into account the different monitors that are set up on the machine that you're running on. So I do know that there are APIs in Electron that allow you to enumerate the displays that are connected to the computer and be able to query, for device information, like, what's the resolution, what are, is it, what's the DPI, um, and I suppose get the relative positions of the monitors. I don't know. It'd be interesting to explore that too. So 00 ended up putting the as I did last time. Let's do this too. I want to, so that we can see what's happening. We created this function called save state. And when the application closes, it's supposed to write the 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 position to the console. And if you can read that, it may be difficult to see because the text again is maybe a little bit too light. But it says the position. Let me just copy and paste this. Here's what this console, the last time it spit something out, this is what it um, reported. So I interesting. the size is 600 by 800, not 800 by 600. I thought the window looked a little strange. I must have messed up. Yeah, I messed up right here. I transposed those numbers. That should be width, and this should be height. And let's imagine that um, that we've already done the work of storing the state to the application's data directory, um, wherever that is, and our module does what it's supposed to do, and it retrieves those values back. So let's take these values, negative 1281, and plug those in here. And rerun it. It almost appears like it's centered on the screen, but it's not. So let's move it over here into this corner, and let's resize it. Let's make it bigger. And then close the application. Now we've got different values that were written to the console. Here's what was written to the console. Let's plug these in. $11.62, $8.49. Let me remove some of these other comments. Okay. And now when we run it, the window is created in the same place and at the same size, same dimensions as what we had just had before. So cool. We know that it works to have the config restored. Now we just need to go through the steps of actually storing and reading back the config from the file system. All right. And we also need to take into consideration the default config. Like if the settings file does not exist, use the default config, right? Let's first, all right, in order to get the path, we need the Electron app. And we can do that by requiring it in. We got that here at the top of main.js. We can require in the same module at the top of our state file. We don't need the browser window or IPC main, so we're just going to get the app from Electron, and let's just say user folder equals app.getPath. Oh, look at there. So, man, I love Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, because it takes into account all the any kind of documentation, JS docs or TypeScript definitions, all that kind of stuff, and gives you IntelliSense, whatever module you, or library you may be using. So here are the some of the options that are available, and user data is what we want. So it's great that it can show us that. So just out of curiosity, well, I'm going to use another built-in library for Node.js called Path. I'm going to require that in, and I'm going to, again, the reason we want to use some of these libraries like Path is so that um, the code that we create will run on every platform. So if you're on Windows, your your path separators are usually backslashes, right? So you got backslash between one folder and another. On a POSIX system, uh, uh, if you're running on Mac or Linux, then the path separators are forward slashes. And I'm sure there's probably some weird scenarios out there where there may be other paths delimiters used, or other ways of handling paths, or ways to escape characters in paths that are specific to that operating system or the particular file system that is used on that operating system. So when you use a library like Path that's built into Node.js, you're using an API that is going to take into account the operating system that it's currently running, and do things the right way so that you don't have to waste a lot of effort into making your application cross-platform. So the path library is, we're going to say the settings file is equal to, and we're going to use path.join to join the user folder, and let's just call it settings.json, because I know we're going to want to store, um, well, not settings. Let's call it. I mean, we're talking about state. Let's just say apps-state.json to be a little more specific. Um, and let's call the variable app state um, file. One of the libraries that I like to use, there's of course a built-in library in Node.js for doing file stuff, for reading and writing files, for checking to see if files exist, to get information about files. Um, and that is the FS module, stands for file system, FS. And we could use that, right? But as I talked about on a previous stream, I prefer to use a module called FS Extra, and I already have it installed as a dependency. If you look inside package.json, you'll see that one of the dependencies here is FS Extra. And it builds on top of the built-in FS module to provide things like um, async and await support, um, promises based support, and it adds specific extensions that are useful for reading and writing JSON, which is something you do. It's a very common thing to do inside of a Node or Electron application. So that's one of the reasons why I love to use it. Um, as such, we're going to want to read and write files, and um, that means we need to have some objects that use async and await. Okay, so um, let's define those as separate functions in our module. So I'm going to say async function uh, read app state. Let me think. I don't want these outside of module.exports. I'll explain in just a minute, but let's go ahead and set up this thing so that we're read app state, and we're going to use the app state file here. So const app state equals. Oh, let's first check to see if the file already exists, right? So exists equals await fs dot path exists, I think is the right one. And we'll use the app state file. And then if exists, we're going to read the file and return the contents. So await fs dot read. And this is the cool thing is that FS extra has an overloaded method called read JSON that's not in the the Node.js library that does the work of reading the contents of a text file and then parsing those contents as JSON and returns a JSON parsed object. So the file is our 8 app state file. So we return the config. If the file doesn't exist, then we're going to return the default config. Okay, so there's our read function. Let's also create a function that is write app state and takes in a config or state, and we're just going to assume that we can write JSON. We need to pass the file name, which is the app state file, and the object, which is the argument state. Okay. So we have this module that takes in a default config and initializes itself with like where's the user folder and where's the app state file going to exist. We've got a couple of functions that rely on that internal data that we've created for the instance of this module and in the form of this app state file. So, when these functions are executed, it's going to know where the app state file is supposed to live. Right now, we're returning a dummy state But that's not what we really need to use inside of our application. What we need to return are these functions: read app state and write app state. Right now, you can see that there's this red squiggly line underneath these functions, and that's because we're not actually using them anywhere. And so ESLint, which is a good friend of mine, as I've mentioned before, first thing I install on every Node.js and Electron project is ESLint and ESLint, my personal ESLint config. So it's warning me that I've got this local function that is not being used. So instead of returning this dummy data, state data, let's instead return an object that includes the read app state and write app state functions. Okay, let's uh, let's now go over to main, and we have our create window. We've got our default config here, and we've got our state manager, and now um, now let's rename this to capital state. And we could use the new keyword if we wanted to. We could say new state. And so now this state, when it comes back, is not going to be a config object, but an object that has um, two functions, read and write. So state manager, let's comment out that one. I have my last position just in case we want to know about that. And we're going to use the state manager dot read app state. And we need to await that. So at some point we may need to refactor some of our code, but the fact that we need to await the state manager, because anytime we're dealing like with the file system, that is an asynchronous operation by default. There's ways of making it synchronous. You can use the sync method, but for the most part, you want to kind of stay in the realm of using the asynchronous methods that are available for doing things like reading and writing files. So we need to await this, which means our create window needs to be an async function. And so now we can use what comes back from read app state should include. And here's where it might get tricky because we haven't declared an X or Y on the default config. So we could do a couple of things. We could either make the state manager more aware of the kinds of properties and things that we're storing, but I don't think that's its job. So here we get into like a philosophical development and question of like, where does this logic lie? I want the state manager to, its only responsibility is to read and write the state file. It doesn't care what's in that file. Doesn't care if there's um, the file has valid data in it. Its job is not to validate all that stuff. Its job is just to read and write the state file. So somewhere over here or somewhere else in the application is where we need to handle those scenarios where we've got this default config. We need to make sure that either we have all the properties set that we are expecting to use, or we could use something like, well, if there's no X value on on here, then we could say the default would be 0. So this is, I forget what you call this, but in JavaScript, modern JavaScript, you can use 2 question marks or 2 pipes to say, use this value, but if that value doesn't exist, use this secondary value. So we could do it either way. We could do it this way, or we could just be explicit in our default config, all the properties that we're looking for. And so we'll just say 0, 0. Just to make sure our logic is working, I'm going to 1 say console.log here to say state file does not exist. And here we will log the contents of the file. So if we run the app right now, rerun it, it's probably going to default to, or it could blow up. Okay, so this was my me trying to be clever and saying, yeah, you can use the new, but state is not a constructor. So the new keyword is no longer behaves like it used to. It really expects a class. So we can't use the new keyword like I was thinking. So instead of new state, we'll just say state. It's a function. Now we could handle all of this up here too, and it might actually be a little bit nicer and more, and maybe a little bit more. I don't know. Best practice, if you will. So let's do this. Instead of all of this living inside the create window, let's set the default config up here at the top of the of main, and let's say lowercase state equals require, and then we'll immediately invoke the function with default config. And we'll still call it state manager. So down here, we don't have to call it, but we can still read the current state. We could also I'm kind of jumping ahead, but we may create window an async function. It doesn't have to be an async function. If we move the state manager to here, so when the application's ready, we read in the previous state, and now we call create window, um, passing in the window state. Now we should be happy. And I like that a lot better. The default config is up here at the top where anyone can, anyone who first opens this application or the source code can see it. They can, we read in the state. And now if we run this, we should see the default state, which it did what I expected. It used 0, 0, and it put the window up on the other screen. Okay. We are a couple minutes past the hour. Are there any questions about any of the stuff that we've done so far? We've still got to finish the state manager to be able to write the config back. That shouldn't be too difficult to add, but I'll save that for the next time. Let me go ahead. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments right now, wherever you're watching. And while you're thinking about any questions, I'm going to commit the latest code to the repository. This is a state manager work in progress. Great question, Josh. Is it possible to go back and watch previous streams? Yes, it is. So on Twitch, they save the last, I don't know, maybe last couple of weeks worth. But absolutely, if you go to the Pluralsight YouTube channel where this is being streamed, all the previous streams should be saved on the YouTube channel. Possibly there's a way to look at previous streams on LinkedIn. I'm not aware of that. But that's a good question, and I will look into that. But absolutely, you should be able to find previous streams on Pluralsight's YouTube channel. I don't know about y'all, but I love to geek out about technology. And I've been a software developer for a number of years now, and I still have so much fun doing it. It's a mental challenge. It's, as I've told folks in the past, it's like I get to solve puzzles. It's a fun game to me. Now, computers can be really frustrating. Software, learning new software and new languages, yes, it can be really frustrating, especially if there's not good documentation or there's just poor examples or stuff that's outdated. There's all kinds of things that can create friction in the work that we do. But at the end of the day, when you are able to get something that works, man, that is such a great feeling. And I love to geek out about this stuff. I hope you join me again for the next stream. And I will see you again, I hope, on a future episode of All Hands on Tech, live developer stream with your host, David Neal. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. See you next time.